Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense here on YouTube. You know, people often believe that insurance policies mean what they say. The problem is, a lot of times they don't mean what you think they say. I'll have more on that in just a moment. One of the real problems with any kind of insurance policy is that it's written in words. Okay, what else would it be written in, right? But the problem with words is that there are lots of different meanings for lots of different words, and as a result, the actual intent of the insurance company may be quite different than the language actually suggests. One of the things that's very frequent when people buy insurance policies for their business is that the insurance company tells them that they have a protection against the loss of use or the loss of profits as a result of a covered peril. And as a result, they tend to think that that means that whenever a bad thing happens, the insurance company will cover their losses as a result of that bad thing happening. Well, when that bad thing is a tornado, or in certain instances a flood, or a lightning strike, or somebody driving a truck through their office, those things are covered. Those things are covered because they start out as property damage. In other words, in the case that we'll be talking about here, the oral surgeon, if a truck ran through the middle of his office and destroyed for example, the waiting room and the reception desk, that would be a covered loss of property because the damage to the property was such that they couldn't continue business. But in this particular case, it was decided in the Eighth Circuit, which is generally Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas. It was decided there that the oral surgeon's insurance policy could not be construed in such a way as to cover losses resulting from the COVID pandemic because there was no actual physical damage to the property that resulted. Now, here is the key to reading any insurance policy. The first thing you have to do is read the policy definitions. Every policy is going to define the terms that it uses in the policy, and most of the time when a policy uses a defined term, in this case covered peril, when you run across covered peril in the policy, covered peril will be in boldface. And that is to assist you in helping to determine what the policy means. All of the definitions that are built into the policy are more likely than not either going to be bold-faced or italicized so that you understand you're reading a defined term. So if you have a question, you can go back to that defined term and say, hey, what exactly does this mean? That's a good thing. The only problem is that a lot of times insurance policies are sold by people who don't read them, and so the insurance agent believes something is covered when it may not be. Now, insurance companies do something fairly smart here, at least if you have no soul, it's fairly smart. They separate the people who do the selling of the insurance from the people who handle the claims. And it's sort of like they put the salespeople in the north end of the building and the underwriting and claims people in the south end of the building, and never the twain shall meet. There's a giant iron wall or a portcullis that goes between them, such that they can't even see each other or touch. And this is done basically to keep policy sellers from saying things that the policy enforcers don't want to do. So in this particular case, an oral surgeon had a business interruption policy that was related to property damage. And he claimed that by virtue of the COVID outbreak, he had suffered a business loss. And he took that all the way up through the trial court where it was ruled against him and up to the Eighth Circuit. Here's what the Eighth Circuit said. The policy cannot reasonably be interpreted to cover mere loss of use when the insured's property suffered no physical loss or damage. This was a claim that was involving the Cincinnati Insurance Company. It's a company that does tend to insure a lot of physicians. A lot of times they offer medical negligence insurance as well as other general liability coverage protections. And as a result, the claim brought by the oral surgeon was denied and it was upheld by the appellate court. How do you prevent a situation like this? Well, the first thing you do is you read the policy very carefully and you understand exactly what it is that those folks are insuring for you. So if it's a property damage insurance policy and the covered perils are things like hail, lightning, tornadoes, floods, wind damage, some kind of injury to your building as a result of a accident with a vehicle that someone else is driving. All of those things are going to be detailed in the policy. They're going to be listed as covered perils. You have to understand that, and then you have to understand what the policy limits are on each of those covered perils. For example, in Florida, where my house is, in addition to having a wind damage policy, I have a hurricane damage policy. And if a tornado jumps up and flies through my area and blows over one of my walls, it's covered by the wind damage, unless there is a hurricane somewhere in the Gulf and the hurricane watch has been issued for any county in Florida. That's right there in the policy. So even though the hurricane had absolutely nothing to do with me, if a tornado spun up at a period in time when a hurricane watch was in effect, again, even if it's nowhere near my house, that hurricane limitation still applies. And the coverage is different, the deductible is different, and that sort of thing. You have to read through the policy to understand what is covered and to know what is not covered. One of the things most frequently not covered by insurance is floods. A flood that is caused by some kind of external force, a dam breaking, a barge running into a lock and dam that produces a temporary surge in the height of the river. Those kinds of things are not covered by traditional insurance. Now, if your sewer backs up or something like that, somebody cuts a water line and it floods your house, those kinds of things may be covered, again, depending on the actual language of the policy. But you have to read the policy to know exactly what is covered and what is not covered. One of the smartest things you can do when you get your policy is get the policy and read it. And if you have questions, do not address them to the insurance agent. The first thing you should do is go see your lawyer and have him research and determine what is covered and what is not covered. The reason I say to go have your lawyer do it is because if you ask the insurance agent, the insurance company is not bound by his explanation. In other words, they can come back and say, well, he misunderstood it too, just like you did. Sorry about that, but that's not what the policy means. Now you may think, that doesn't really happen very often, does it? Oh, listen, it happens every day. In fact, if you were to go to your state's website that has court cases in it, the one company or the companies that you would find most often suing or defending are insurance companies. And they are suing or defending against the people that they have sold policies to, because those policies have been interpreted differently by the insurance company than by the insured. And there is an entire area of law called bad faith insurance that basically holds insurance companies accountable when they knowingly interpret a policy in such a way as to deprive a homeowner or a policyholder of their coverage under the policy. So that is very important. After you have your insurance interpreted by a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction, You can then have your attorney draft a letter to the insurance company asking specifically how the company will interpret that policy so that you can get a definitive answer. Now, the insurance company may not give you one, but in that situation, you probably want to choose a different insurance company. There are lots of different insurance companies all over the country. Many of them are rated differently than you might think. Some of the bigger names may be rated lower on the AM Best scale than some of the lesser known names. Some of them may have better records for claims handling than some of the bigger names. It is not uncommon to find some of the bigger names, who I will not mention here, as defendants in major lawsuits because they simply did not do for their policyholders what they alleged they would do for their policyholders. So that's something to be aware of. Read it, understand it, and only pay for it if you know what you are getting. That way, if you do have a covered peril, you'll know what is covered and what is not covered. And in addition, you can often buy insurance policies that will cover those gaps. You may have to look for them. You may have to go to an independent insurance broker to find them. But in almost every instance, you can find somebody who's willing to underwrite the potential loss for a particular type of hazard. Now, as to whether or not the courts ought to apply the way that the rulings the way that they do in these insurance cases, there's an argument to be made that when an insurer decides that it will cover a flood resulting from a busted pipe differently than it will cover a flood that results from a backed up sewer, that it is within the insurance company's right to determine what kinds of harms it's going to cover. And so that's why courts interpret it based on the language of the policy. And generally speaking, the interpretation that the buyer placed on the policy, or the understanding that they had when they purchased the policy, does not control. Normally, again, unless the language is vague or ambiguous, then the plain language of the policy is going to apply. Only when something is clearly ambiguous, which is, I guess, kind of an oxymoron, but only when a court determines that a provision is ambiguous is any kind of extrinsic evidence, this is what I thought, this is what the insurance agent told me, only in those situations is that kind of evidence going to be admitted. Well, I hope that clears up at least some information or some questions you may have about insurance policies and how they're interpreted and how courts look at them. If you found this information helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would go over there and punch the subscribe button so that you can get all the videos that we do with respect to the law. And also, if you would, I'd really appreciate it if you'd punch that like button. You know, the best thing about the like button is you can push it and it doesn't cost you a dime. And what it does do is it lets YouTube as well as other people know exactly how valuable this content is to you and other folks. And in addition to that, it will help put this content in front of other people who may have questions about insurance and other things for that matter. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a terrific day, and I'll see you next time.